everyone. Welcome to our first segment with Coach Elle Hamilton-Wohl for our Pleasure Prescribed Retreat. She is going to be one of our coaches that we're bringing on to give you a module. So a little bit about Elle. She is a sex and trauma therapist for rebellious people pleasers. I love that. And she helps folks from all walks of life have sex the way they want, and even if they don't know what that is yet. So I welcome you, Elle. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tiffany. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Okay, so we'll start off with the questions. The first one, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common concerns based on the work that you have been doing and the conversations you've been having that women have expressed the most?
Yeah, and so it's so interesting being a sex therapist and a trauma therapist. I mean, you really get such a wide umbrella of anything that touches human sexuality and gender. But I will say recently, I have been seeing a lot of clients coming in with pain with sex. That's certainly been a really big issue. It's over the last year. That's a really big one. I've had a lot of couples coming in with what we call differing desires, where maybe one partner has a higher sex drive than the other, has also been a really common one coming in. And then sort of an evergreen one is, what is my gender identity? What is my sexual orientation? Who am I attracted to? And maybe processing feelings around that or figuring out ways to figure it out and follow through on it in a way that feels good, especially if you're already in a partnered relationship. I'd say those are probably the main three. And then, of course, like everything else sprinkled in there too. Folks who are interested in ethical non-monogamy or kink. I also do a lot of work with women who are survivors of sexual assault and sort of recovering their sexual wellness and sexual health, and not only just healing from the trauma, but also expanding into like, well, what does pleasure and joy and fun look like? So I love the pleasure prescribed name of this because pleasure is an under discussed topic, I think.
Yes, definitely so. With that, it's like a multitude of different topics and different issues. But I'm going to go back to the pain with sex. So with that can you elaborate on what sort of pain are women experiencing? And then also go into kind of what are some ways that women can identify the issues before it becomes pain?
Right, right. And so this part is going to require a little bit of medical terminology, and it's going to be different depending on who you talk to. So from a therapist perspective, the
Mhm.
DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we use for diagnosing, has kind of collapsed all of the pain into one title, which is GPPD, Genital Pelvic Pain and Penetration Disorder. What a lovely lovely term to have, nice and long and hard to spell. And if you work with a medical provider, they are going to be the ones who kind of divide it into the different subtypes. So the two main ones I see are vaginismus, which is what we call pain at penetration. So like the site of penetration is vaginismus versus what they call dyspareunia is pain with sex sort of during the intercourse itself, like in the vaginal canal. And for the purpose of therapy, the difference isn't that important. Pain with sex is pain with sex. We see a lot of the same things regardless of which one it is. But one thing that when we're talking about pain with sex, you really do want to build a team around yourself if that's something you're experiencing. So you want to have therapy, but you also want to make sure you have medical providers. So a gynecologist, a urogynecologist, if we're talking about a male person, a male body that's experiencing pain with sex, a urologist. I'm going to tailor this for women or people who identify as women because I think that's mostly who's going to be listening. But men can have pain with sex as well too. Certainly pelvic floor physical therapy. That is probably my biggest referral. And I work very, very closely with pelvic floor physical therapists because they'll sort of address the biological situation that's happening down there. It can be muscles being too tight or too loose. It can be something else going on. It could be IBS. It could be endometriosis, like it can be all these different things that impact it from a medical standpoint that you definitely want to make sure you have someone helping you with. I would say those are the biggest ones, the gynecologist and the pelvic floor PT. There's also a lot of my clients love to get sort of like other supportive care, craniosacral therapy, acupuncture, Reiki, like all different kinds of PT for other health issues because injuries in other parts of the body can actually impact the pelvic floor, of course, because pelvic floor is like the bottom of our core and has a big part with pain with sex. So definitely build a team around yourself. And if you are noticing any of those like psychological effects, and I'd say the most common one I see is pain. It's what we call pain catastrophizing. So I want to preface this by saying the pain is not in your head. It's real. I think a lot of women, when they first bring it up to just a gynecologist who maybe doesn't specialize in sexual health issues, will be like, oh, it's fine. It's just, you just need to use lube, or you just, the age old, have a glass of wine before you have sex, which is not really.
Not a thing.
Not a thing. Not a thing. I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, but what will happen is as it goes untreated, patients will start to catastrophize the pain. So it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in their heads, which typically creates avoidance. Now, not always, but a lot of times what I see with clients is then they'll start to avoid sexual situations, which if you're partnered can create a lot of problems in the couple. So I would say those are some of the big things I've noticed. I would say pain with sex is common, but not normal. So it's something a lot of people experience, but it doesn't have to be that way, is what I mean by that. So there are treatments out there, especially if you can work with a team around you, you'll be able to kind of get to the solution quicker. And as it sort of, the treatment evolves, you can kind of dive into the different paths it goes. But off the top of my head, like those are kind of the first things I would say for folks is to definitely build a team, get a doctor, get a therapist, especially a sex therapist, and maybe any of these other like supportive therapies as well too.
And then you mentioned with the gynecologist, make sure that they specialize in sexual health.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. There's a really great resource. And let me see if I can send it to you. ISWICH is the acronym. I'm trying to remember what the website is. It is isswsh.org. And they are the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. And providers can go on there and put their information if they're medical providers who specialize in women's sexual health. So that can be a great resource. If you're in a city, obviously, you're going to get a lot more people on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are in a more rural area, it might just have to be like supplementing with your, annual gynecology.
Okay.
Or Urogyn.
Now you mentioned not dealing with the issues of the pain and the impact that has on your sex life leading to avoidance. What are things other than building your team and seeking help? Like how do we prevent people from getting to the avoidance stage?
Yeah. And that's a lot of the work of therapy. Well, I guess at that point, the avoidance has probably happened by the time people are in my office. That cycle is well underway. But to avoid the avoidance cycle, it's tough because a lot of it relies on skills that we aren't necessarily taught as children, especially if you're in a female body, especially if you're a person of color, right? If anything, you've been denied access to these resources, or shamed for wanting these resources, So I would say one of my biggest things I've noticed as a sex therapist is unpacking the shame around things for most people has been really important because I call it the shame monster. Like that shame monster tends to get pretty loud when it comes to sexual issues. And so there can be a lot of shame around like something's wrong with me, no one's going to want to be with me. Or if you're in a partnered relationship, like my partner is not happy. I have a lot of women who come in who are anxious that their partner will cheat on them. Not because of the emotional connection, but because they feel like they're not having sex. So they're worried that that's going to happen. So I would say the skills that therapy teaches that really help with this, if you already have them or if you have another way to access them, would be communicating. Strong communication between you and your partner is going to be really important with pain with sex, just to avoid that avoidance and pain cycle. Because what tends to happen is like we fear the pain, we avoid it, it gets bigger. It's sort of, I don't want to make a exact parallel to what the exposure therapy, like if you're scared of snakes, right? You go and hold a snake. You look at pictures of snakes. Then you have a stuffed animal snake, and then you go look, hold a snake.
A different level. Yeah.
Right. But it can be kind of similar, where like something can get bigger in our head. So if you're starting to notice I think that's really important. If you're starting to notice, oh, I'm avoiding sex or I'm avoiding penetration, because that's also something I want to touch on too, is when I say sex, we all assume I'm talking about like a heteronormative definition of sex, which tends to overly rely on penile vaginal intercourse.
Right.
Yeah, when
Hmm.
we're talking about male-female relationships, of course, if you're not in a male-female relationship, you can still have pain with sex.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah, but folks who are in the queer community tend to have more expansive definition of what sex is. So, in a way, that can be a strong advantage in coming into this work versus with heterosexual couple or a couple where it's male and female, whether, no matter how they identify. There can be a little bit more education around sex doesn't just have to be penile vaginal intercourse. There's all these other things you can do, and kind of some education pieces around that. There are
Hmm.
great resources for education around that. There's like one website called OMG Yes,
Oh,
which
I've
is
heard
like
of that.
yeah, it's a great resource. They have videos, it's a sexual education. It's explicit, like it's sexual
Yeah.
education. So
Hmm.
they'll show videos on how to do things. There's a kink oriented one I cannot remember the name of, but things like that, or like ethically produced porn. Want to be
Yeah.
careful getting educated from Pornhub, but there are some like educational or like ethically produced
That are
porn.
more intentional of this is,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Yes, but like something like OMGS, I think would be an excellent resource. Or a lot of every city I've ever been in has some sort of sexuality education store. So
Okay.
like going, and those folks, they can be kind of scary to think about going into a sex shop. But if you kind of look at their website and get a feel for them before, like most of the people who work there are very passionate sex educators,
Mhm.
and they'll have books on how to do foreplay. They'll have the tools you need to make things easier. So I'd say if you wanted to explore this on your own without a therapist or a coach, noticing that that avoidance is coming on, unpacking any shame around it, because there's no need to feel ashamed. Like this is just a part of normal human sexuality. It's not going to be forever, like most
Yeah.
things. Strong communication with your partner if you have one, to make
Mhm.
sure that you're on the same page, and that because that can kind of happen in the partner dynamic. It can snowball pretty quickly
Right.
because you have two people who are anxious
Mhm.
about sex.
Yes.
So making sure the communication there is really strong. And then third, I'd say education on the different types of sex you can have,
Mhm.
which we can definitely go into more as well today. But using those websites online or going to a local sex education shop and like getting more resources on and kind of normalizing and expanding your definition of sex.
So when we go to kind of the types of sex and you say communicating with your partner, but also like individually exploring kind of what is my pleasure? What do I enjoy? Do you find it that people have a difficult time communicating like, hey, I'm having a problem and this is how I have addressed it with my partner, or they haven't addressed it at all? Like the communication piece, or, just communicating it to your doctor, even if, even before you've been diagnosed with something, like, do people even bring it up?
No, they don't. That's a great question. That's a great question. And I mean, again, I'm a little biased because as a therapist, like
Yeah.
by the time people get to me, like
Uh-huh.
they come in with a lot of big feelings because they've mostly been sitting on this for years. Like, and I don't think people are intentionally avoiding or hiding. I think it's a scary ass subject to
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
back to the idea of like, we don't really talk about sex in a healthy way in this country.
Mhm.
I live in Louisiana and like, if you go to a public school, that we're abstinence only education state. So you're literally learning nothing
Mhm. Yeah.
about sexuality. And we live in a purity culture where like we're not supposed to think about sex, but we're supposed to all have it and be good at it and have kids. But, it doesn't
Right.
make sense. It's all
It
very
doesn't work
confusing.
that way.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'd say, but most people avoid it or aren't aware that it's something
Mhm.
that can be worked on. Yeah, or they're so distracted by other things that it's kind of like, oh, I'll deal with that later, like
Yeah.
deal with that
Mhm.
later. Individuals and couples, I would say. So by the time they get to me, yes, we are now in like it is a problem. Like it's fully a problem and we need to get in there and address what's going on.
So are there any cases where, maybe you're going with your own individual self-pleasure, and so you're going through the whole techniques of, okay, this is how I can figure it out. And in that individual moment, you like, oh, maybe I'm doing it wrong. or maybe I should stop because I'm experiencing pain. And do you have any women or people coming in having that conversation with you?
Yeah. And so that's been interesting. So another interesting facet of my work specifically, and I'm not going to say this is every sex therapist, because not all sex therapists are also trauma therapists. This is sort of my unique viewpoint of
Mhm.
it. A lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times when those clients are coming in, there's also a significant trauma history
Yeah, okay.
as well to unpack, whether that's sexual abuse or assault, physical abuse or assault, neglect, things like that. I'm sure we've all heard of the book "The Body Keeps the Score." Like that's a very famous book. Yeah,
That was a good
so
book.
it really does. Yeah, and I'm noticing just, and this is sort of anecdotal evidence, but with a lot of those clients coming in, I'm noticing sort of a chronic. I'm sure again, folks have heard of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Mhm.
The four trauma responses are, well, not the only four, but the main four that our nervous system can kind of get stuck in following traumatic experiences. So, would it be helpful to give a quick rundown of those, or we think people have an idea what those are?
No, let's share it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what happens is when your body goes through a traumatic experience, your nervous system is going to either process and digest and make meaning out of that traumatic experience, or it's not, and it's going to get stuck in that trauma. This is from a somatic lens, which is what I use when I'm talking about trauma. That's why not all stressful events are traumatic, but all traumatic events are stressful. So, for instance, I could see a car accident outside my window. I could get counseling. I could process the feelings with someone. I could reach out to my support team. I could take care of myself. I could have the resources to take care of myself, take a week off of work, get some sleep, take care of myself. And I could process the experience and make meaning of it, in which case it will not necessarily be a traumatic event in the same
Okay.
way. I'll remember it. I'll remember that time that happened and I won't feel positive about it, but it won't have me locked in as if it's happening right now.
Got it. Okay.
Versus if for whatever reason, maybe the trauma was too big, too much was happening at once, you didn't
Mhm.
have the resources available at the time to process it, which many of us don't, especially if we're
Right.
talking about childhood trauma, because we were literally children when it
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah.
We can almost become stuck as if that trauma is happening every single day of our lives. So it's almost like every day I wake up, I'm watching that car accident.
Got it.
And that's when we kind of talk about those PTSD diagnoses. But what I've noticed is my clients will tend to pick one of the four: fight, like I'm going to fight everybody, I'm irritable.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, we know the person. They're always in a fight with someone.
Yes.
Yes,
Like
they're constantly
extreme
like,
aggression and not really sure
exactly.
where that's coming from.
Exactly, exactly. So they can get stuck in fight. You can stuck in flight, where you're constantly running away from problems. The second something gets hard, you're out of there. We also have friends like that who like date someone for a month and then they're gone, and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, you just that person, what they did wasn't that big. Like they forgot to call you back. Like you're running away. Like that. It's kind of a bigger reaction than you would expect to that.
Right.
We have freeze, which is that chronic shutdown, zoned out, fatigued, exhausted, feel like you can't move. I'm seeing a lot of freeze right now, actually, with everything going on in the world. Just a lot of
Um,
people like
that makes sense.
having our phones
Too
by our
much,
face.
too much stimulation going on and it's
Exactly.
shuts you down. Yeah.
Everyone's like shutting down.
Mhm.
That can be a kind of chronic nervous system reaction. And then the last one is fawn, which is people pleasing, which is basically, yeah, how can I make myself as small as possible and give everybody else what they need to keep myself safe? Uh,
Yes.
yeah. And so a lot of times when I have clients coming in specifically with pain with sex,
Mhm.
not always, but typically there's a trauma history. And I'm noticing that they're kind of stuck in one of those. For my clients, it tends to either be fawn or freeze that I'm just really noticing overall. And you'll notice it because it's coming up in sex, but it's also coming up in life because sex
Okay.
imitates life, you know. And so if you're feeling frozen in sex, it's probably not the only place you're feeling frozen. But something I'm noticing with a lot of those clients is because they're in that chronic trauma response, as I said, either that freeze or that fawn, there's a lot of contraction in their bodies. Like they're very tense. Your vagina is part of your body. It can also get very tense and very
Mhm.
frozen, which makes it hard. Like, if you have a pipe that's really hard and constricted and
Yeah.
tight, like trying to have sex obviously is going to be painful. So that is something I'm noticing, which is also why I think having a team is so helpful because some
Yeah.
of that, like PT can help with that, craniosacral
Mhm.
therapy can help with that, acupuncture can help with that, massage can help with that, all
Right.
these different modalities can kind of help the body relax as well as we work on the trauma too.
I like that you emphasize that your sexual pain does not always have to deal with trauma. So
Mhm.
with that being said, can is if you are experiencing trauma, is there a difference between trauma and, let's say, you have this what's the word, dyspareunia? I don't know if I'm
Oh,
saying it right.
dysphoria. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, if you're having one of those conditions, like, are those two different, can you separate those two things, or is it all holistic when you're talking about the two and you can't really separate the two?
Right. And it's going to depend who the therapist is and who the client
Okay.
is, of course, too. Yes, not everybody who comes in with pain during sex has a trauma history, for
Right.
sure. That is absolutely like not always. There just is a strong overlap. Now, to be fair, there's also a strong overlap between people who identify as female in trauma. So it's kind of, and
Right.
I'll say if I'm working with a woman of color,
Mhm.
there's trauma because of
Yeah.
the systems of oppression in this country.
Right.
So I know as a baseline, there's a
Yeah.
trauma history, let
Okay.
alone anything else like COVID or, natural
Yeah.
disasters, personal stuff, right? So for me, they're almost sort of holistically wrapped around each other in a way. Sure, there's probably some folks coming in, but, and even if you want to tie into this, like the
Yeah.
shame piece can kind of be part of, if you think of it as a piece
Part of
of,
trauma.
yeah, oppression against women or, like,
Right.
so it
So
can
it doesn't necessarily, it can be trauma based, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a sexual trauma experience.
correct. Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I've even had clients come in who have a trauma history that's not sexual at all, no sexual
Right.
abuse, no sexual assault, maybe family emotional neglect,
Got it. Okay.
and it still impacts because their body is still in that freeze state,
Hmm.
impacts how pain with sex is showing up, if that
Right.
makes sense.
It does.
Mhm.
And so, what have you found in your patients that they're ready to come and talk to you? It's like, okay, I can't take it anymore. What have you found to be the most effective method to kind of pull that information out, develop some, assist the patient with developing some self-awareness and getting some solutions to what they're experiencing?
Yeah, yeah, and then, again, different for every person. But
Right.
I would say a lot of it is because a lot of times people are coming in with so much urgency. Because by the time they're coming in, like as I said, this is usually code red. Like I
Yeah.
get it. It's hard to find a sex therapist. There's only 7 in the state of Louisiana. I mean, that's where I'm
Mhm.
at. So
Mhm.
I'm sure there's more in like bigger metropolitan areas, but
Right. Right.
that's 7 for the entire state. You
Wow.
know, yeah. So that's not a lot of people.
No.
Yeah, so find, and there's more of us popping up every day, but it's hard to find. It's hard to afford. It's hard to find the time. It's also hard to find the time. Like a lot of people are doing therapy at their lunch hour at work, and they're like, I don't want to
Mhm.
talk about sex on my virtual appointment at work. So like there's a lot of
Right.
barriers.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that. So by the time they come in, they're pretty ready to go. Like it's code
Mhm.
red, it's gotten really, really bad, which my advice would be, if at all possible, to come in sooner would be
Mhm.
awesome. Like back to that question of like, how do you know when this is becoming a problem?
Yeah.
That would be great. If people like kind of became aware sooner and came in sooner, that would help just because we'd have less to unpack. Um,
Right. Right.
yeah. Yeah. And especially if you are in a relationship, because as I said, that tends to compound. And so, but even if you're an individual, it can impact how you're showing up in dating and things like that. Coming in sooner would be great. But yeah, by the time people come in, they're pretty like urgent. So a big part of my practice is actually, and people don't really like this part, but I have to kind of counterbalance the urgency because the
Okay.
urgency is not going to help your body relax. So it has to be this piece of like, okay, this is what is. We kind of have to work on some acceptance
Mhm.
and some self-awareness around what's going on.
Yeah.
How did we get there? Reminding me that I'm new to this. I know the people coming in have been doing this for decades, but I'm new. I need time to figure out what's going on. So
Yeah.
sort of slowing down and letting the body relax and kind of show up is really important for me. And then also like seeing, like, assessing how self-aware is the person. If they've
Mhm.
been in therapy before, they're usually pretty self-aware. If this
Yes.
is their first time, some of those skills have to be taught at the beginning. Self-care needs to be taught. We do a lot of assessment in sex therapy. It's called an ecological assessment because we don't just look at the person, we look at the person in their environment, the person in the way they grew up. What messages did you get around sex? Are you part of a religion that has opinions on sex, positive or negative? What has your sexual health been like? What have your relationships been like? All these kinds of pieces come into it. That's really important to understand. what's going on. And I think I strayed from your question because your question was when people come in, what's been helpful with them?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So I'd say definitely dialing down the urgency. And I'd
Yes.
say mostly practicing those skills. Self-awareness,
Mhm.
self-care, communication is a huge one. I even tell people to kind of come up with a an elevator pitch, if you will, for
Yeah.
like, and I say this for anything, like even folks who identify as like asexual or, that have come to me for this before is like, I want to date, I want to go on the apps, but once I start dating, I know that like on the third date, sex is going to come up and I don't know how to handle it. So even just like,
Right.
let's
Yeah.
practice. Okay. What's the elevator pitch going to be? What's the timing? I always recommend we have those conversations when everyone has their clothes on.
Yes. And it's easier then.
Yes, because once someone's naked and you're like, wait a second, I can't, sex is painful. They're like, ah, and then they worry that you think that they hurt you. So it's
Right. Yeah.
just
Hmm.
sort of talking through some of those logistical pieces. I also do have samples in my office I'll show folks of like I have lube samples and we'll talk about the different types of lubes. So some education there. I have a set of the dilators. Now, I don't use them with clients because those are a pelvic floor PT thing, but I just want to
Yeah.
show people if they haven't been yet. But if you have pain with sex and you do work with pelvic floor PT, you are most likely going to end up getting a set of dilators,
Yeah.
which is a set. They look like dildos, but they're sort of just like long cylinders and they come in a variety of sizes and they start like pretty small, like this big,
Yeah.
they
Hmm.
work up. And a pelvic floor PT will tell you how to use those, not me, because I don't know. But at least I can show people and be
Yeah.
like, look, this is what they are. I got
Right.
what's it called? A sample set sent to me from a
Yeah.
company.
So it's not a
Over.
shock.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you can kind of get a
Hmm.
feel for what this looks like.
Yeah.
So we'll do some education on that. A lot of normalizing around shame,
Mhm.
unpacking around the shame, or even guilt. People come in feeling guilty for the way that their
Right.
pain has influenced their partner or past partners. So just normalizing all of it and making sure it's okay. I think sometimes a lot of people haven't really heard that, like haven't heard that it's okay and
Hmm.
that it's normal and like or it's common and it's not unfixable. Like there's things we
Yeah.
can do. And then I say one of my favorite things to do, and this kind of has to come a little later in the process, but is sort of helping folks build a sexual menu. Because like I
Mm.
said, I think we get so hyper focused on penile vaginal intercourse if you were in a male female relationship that like we kind of forget all the other things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That can still intimately stimulate your body. That
Yeah.
is not penetration, like you said, until especially if you're going through the steps to improve your pain. You can still experience pleasure without
Yes.
the penetration part until you are in a state of better sexual wellness.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, so coming up with like a menu of like what do I like, what do I not like. The clinical term for it is outer course. Normal people we would call it foreplay. Like yeah. What are the things like you're into outside of penis? And because you can also have yeah, exactly like you said, like you can start having sex, decide it's painful. My other favorite technique I use with especially with couples, but even with individuals who are dating folks, is a green light word and a red light word.
Oh,
So and you can even make it so it has an emoji attached to it. I found that to be really helpful for folks. Is like if I pick the green circle, that means like all steam ahead, like let's go, let's have sex, I'm open. And you
yeah,
can text your partner that, or you can say like some people will use words like I don't know, like green apple. That
yeah.
means yeah. And then the red light word being yeah, like okay, stop, not right now. So you could engage in foreplay, use the lube, start, okay, it still hurts. I'm going to use my red light word and we're going to
Mhm.
refocus onto something else. So it doesn't have to end.
Mhm.
Experience doesn't have to end. And then the other thing, oh, there's two more things I would say.
Yeah.
Sensate focus, which is huge in sex therapy, which is like you can get the PDF online, but I'll help guide people through that. It's like a process of like different touch and sensation that you do on the outside of the body, working your way in over time to kind of
Yeah.
become more focused on the sensation and the experience of what things feel like than
Yeah.
racing towards an orgasm,
Mhm.
which I think is really important. So that's something I really like. Sensate focus, expanded menu. What
You
else?
said the foreplay and green light, red light words.
Yes. It'll come back to me in a second. Okay, it'll come back to me in a second. I don't
Okay,
remember.
that
Yeah.
is okay. And just kind of to wrap things up, I
Mhm.
want people to know that you are going to be elaborating on
Mhm.
all of these things and more on
Yes.
June 20th through 22nd for the Pleasure Prescribed 3-day virtual retreat. So people can leave with all of these tools that you just explained, plus a little bit extra, and then you'll have more people at this retreat to kind of help build that team that you were just talking about to help you through this process. And so to wrap things up, what is the one thing that you would like people to know about going through the process of better sexual health and wellness?
Yeah. Okay. The one thing I think I would want people to know is that it's so much bigger than just sex, I think. I think to me, the reason people can kind of put it to the back of the to-do list is they're like, oh, it's just this one context. It's just when I'm having sex that this thing is happening. So it's like not as important. And
Yeah.
I would actually suggest that you reorient and maybe make that top three on your to-do list because sexual health is so tied to not only your physical health overall as
Mhm.
a person, but I think when it's such a conduit to all these other things, like sexual energy is also creative energy.
Yes.
Sexual energy is also connection and intimacy in relationships. It's like a feeling of satisfaction. It can be a way to rest and relax. It can be a way to come back into your body. So there's so many different wonderful aspects of sexual health that I think go beyond just the sort of clinical, I go
Right.
get my pap smear. So I love that you use the word pleasure for the retreat because I think when we can orient towards pleasure, it's so expansive. And if we can find more pleasure in our sexuality, either with ourselves or with a partner or partners, it multiplies. End up finding pleasure in so many more places in our life, like even the small, and not necessarily sexual pleasure, but even just like the pleasure of your coffee in the morning or like the sunset, or it just really kind of helps create that gratitude naturally and like those connections and relationships anyway. So I love that the word pleasure is in the retreat because I think that is such an important part of sexual wellness.
Thank you so much, Elle. I truly appreciate it. And again, Elle is going to be one of the fabulous coaches. Pleasure Prescribed Retreat, 3-day virtual retreat, June 20th through 22nd. So you can dive in deep with more of the things that she presented to you today.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Elle.